out of the 5 glasses of water we drink, one could be from the river Kuam. Coming back to Mr. Venkatesh's introduction, Mr. Venkatesh is a novelist, historian, and a columnist. He hails from the Zamindari family of Devakode in Chettinad. Devakode Zameen was fissioned off the bigger Ramnath Zameen about, I think, in the year 1900, and it survived till independence. Under the Zameen, Devakode became a pioneer in electricity, the second town to be electrified in the presidency, and thrived as a big culture center of Satir, the Bharatanatyam form, Carnatic music, and Tamil Isai as well. Some of you could be interested to know that the Zamindar family sponsored the East Gopuram of the Rameshwaram temple. Their family trust runs the temple of Kalayar Koval as well. Mr. Venkatesh, however, was born in Madras, Mylapore to be specific, and has lived all his life except for the stint of 4 years in Chennai. A bilingual author, Mr. Venkatesh writes in both Tamil and English. Of the 3 historical novels he has written in Tamil, Kaveri Maidan, the son of Kaveri, is a sequel to the greatest Tamil historical novel ever written. No guesses, it's Kalki's Ponniyin Selvan. You all should be aware of the fact that after a few successful bids, now it's in the safe hands of Mr. Maniratnam and his team at Madras Talkies, and they are producing a movie on Kalki's Ponniyin Selvan, which will be released in 2 editions. Gods, Kings and Slaves, The Siege of Madurai, published by Mr. Venkatesh's first novel in English. It's about Malik Kafur's invasion of South India. It remained on the Amazon's bestseller list for a considerable time, and best-selling author Amish Tripathi reviewed it as, "It made me laugh, it made me cry, and it left me disturbed." Mr. Venkatesh found a metamorphosis in life after the social media revolution. He found his skills in crowdsourcing and getting together people of similar interests onto one platform. 2 of the groups he started, the Madras Local History Group and the Ponniyin Selvan Group, both have around 20,000 members. Mr. Venkatesh writes a column in DT Next, that's the English version of Daily Tandi, Daily Tandi. He writes on interesting tales from Madras dating back to the 40s. He won the Vedavali Memorial Award for a heritage enthusiast last year from the TAG Foundation. He is working on a second English novel set during the civil war between Aurangzeb and Dara Shikoh. So, friends, this is just a brief introduction of Mr. Venkatesh Ramakrishnan, who will take us through the next 45 minutes. I'm sure it's going to be a scintillating session, after which we could pull in the questions from the group. Thank you so much, and over to Mr. Venkatesh.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, this becomes a mandatory question at the starting of the webinars. Okay, and I should thank Rotary Club of Carnatic for this captive audience. You gave the state of total lockdown. This is truly a captive audience that we can talk about. And yet she rises again. I would like to talk about Madras, the tribulations that she underwent in the 400 years of her history, and how she got up every time and started running again. We have become a megapolis now, and some of this might be a little depressing to learn about the sadder parts of history of Madras, but it will also tell us how bigger burdens the city has borne than this corona. In the sense that We have got out of pandemics, cyclones, and whatnot. We have issues about bombing, war, tsunamis, water, pandemics, evacuations, cyclones, and scarcities. Let me start with the basic history of Madras. Madras city was never visualized with ambition by its founding fathers. At most, they planned a trading station, a factory, and a small fort by the sea. They thought about a population of, say, a few hundred. Their water needs were met by a few wells within the fort, and only 6-meter walls protected them. We have very ancient villages in the present Madras map, but Madras happens to be a colonial city, what the British founded, where the Fort St. George exists today. So we'll have to look at that part of the 400 years of this geography. The city has endured the worst of its times for 381 years and has emerged only stronger. And browsing through the history of the tribulations will tell us how much we have endured, and most of them greater dangers than Corona. The last point is very important because most of these dangers have been several times more dangerous than Corona, and we came out with a smile, or rather our ancestors came out with a smile. The founding the city, the year was 1639, Francis Day, Kogan, and Nagabatan. Nagabatan was a gunpowder mixer and who used to handle the guns, and he had lost 3 of his fingers on his right hand. He was the Indian guide for the Englishmen to start this city. What is today Madras was earlier just a sandy stretch of beach and 2 unnamed rivers. One river they named as the North River. It has vanished from the maps today. The other river, they didn't name it initially. They called it the Triplicane River, they called it the Pundamali River and the Chinnathiri River, and finally it took a name, the Kuo. The land grant was from the Pundamali Nayak, who was a subordinate of the Chandragiri Vijayanagar Empire. So this was 3 kilometers north of the Portuguese town of Santo, and a few 10 or 15 kilometers south of the Dutch in Pulicat. So for both of them, it was just a day's forced march, and they looked with an evil eye on Madras and the British. There was a sandbar on the sea 2 kilometers away, and so no ship could come to Madras beach, either in an emergency or for trade. The funny fact about this is, people always accused Francis Day of having a girlfriend in Santo, and that is why he chose this ineligible site of land for a fort. How true, we don't know, but there seems to be a fact that this wasn't a correct place for a fort or a trading station. The first danger to the city came 1 year down when the Vijayanagar Empire, or the remnants of the Vijayanagar Empire, Rangaraya, asked for the town back, and the British escaped that. Several times under siege by Hyder Ali, Tipu Sultan, Golconda, and there were so many wars fought. You can't count the number of battlefields that exist within Madras, now terribly overgrown with buildings and other things. We had a fort, we had a battlefield near the Katipara Junction, which is now a polo ground. We had one in MRC Nagar, and almost every road of Kacheri Road or Santom had a battle in it. And there are some names of roads that are very interesting. There's a road called Powder Mill Road off Kacheri Road in Mylapore. People would imagine it to be face powder or some masala powder, but it is actually gunpowder. The gunpowder was being made in a street off Mylapore, and the road still is called Powder Mill Road. The most serious challenge was in 1746. Fort St. George and Madras were captured by the French under General La Bourdonnais. He had a set of ships, an armada of ships outside Madras, and he was throwing cannonballs at the fort and missing most of them. But then one shot, lucky for the French, fell on the tavern. Tavern is the equivalent of a Tasmac shop. So it fell on the tavern and opened the doors, and the people, all the besieged people, they felt they should have a drink, a couple of drinks and a few more drinks, and finally the fort had to surrender. So a few years down the line, say 3 years to be more precise, Britain got back Madras in a swap for a Canadian town of Louisbourg. So the only time Madras has ever fallen was to the French, and even the British did not capture it back. It was got back in an exchange. So there's a town called Louisburg in Nova Scotia in Canada, for which Madras was exchanged. Who would think the question of Austrian succession, the succession of an emperor or empress in Austria, would play a role in the history of Madras? Yet it did. There was a time all European powers got together and said whoever had captured the other's territory should return it. So the British returned Louisburg in lieu of Madras. The American War of Independence was in a way triggered by this giving of Louisburg back to the French, because the people had spent a lot in capturing Louisburg and they did not like it being exchanged for an Asian town. And never again would Madras change hands till 1947 when the tricolour was hoisted. When the British came back, they realized that the fort had been crowded around by the native huts and they could not visualize an enemy coming from afar. So they needed an esplanade. You can find the word esplanade in a lot of towns: Penang, Singapore, Calcutta, Madras. Esplanade is an open space around the fort, which gives you an easy view of the enemy, which Madras did not have the luxury of. So the first major danger to the civilian areas of Madras came as soon as the British got back to Madras fort. They demolished the entire Black Town. The Black Town then was where the High Court, the Law College, where the Raja Annamalai Mandram, the Madras Medical College, the Reserve Bank. This was where the Black Town was, and all these were demolished, including the temples. And the British forced the Indians to move 4 roads away. And this was the first time that the entire civilian population lost their homes, they lost their temples, lost their communal spaces. And how did the British enforce that they did not build again here? The obelisks, the only surviving obelisks. They did something like 13 obelisks. This is next to the Parry building. You can still see it. It is being maintained by the Parry. The earlier one was on the Broadway, which has been swallowed by a building right now or broken down. These obelisks warned the Indians not to build beyond this. In my opinion, if this city of Madras, this lovely city of Madras, had to be abandoned by the people and the population, it had to be because of the water scarcity. That was the gravest danger the city has ever faced. Because the original planners did not plan for a huge population. They had a few hundreds inside and the wells were enough. The struggle for good water to drink has plagued the city ever since its founding days. And today, filling a few pots of water from the water lorry leaves an average Chennai puffed with pride. So this is something that has been happening to us for 400 years. This is the 7 Wells building, the compound rather, which you can see very close to Stanley Hospital in the corner of the Mint Street. As early as 1750s, the water reserve for the fort became a problem. The water in the fort wells had turned brackish because of overdrawing, naturally because of a higher population. The British identified a spot in North Pedanayak and Pet, now at the end of the Mint Street, and they commissioned the digging of 7 wells. This area is still called 7 wells because it was very important. Till our dams came, these 7 wells sustained the thirst of Madras. Water from these wells were raised manually by picotas, or called atrums in Tamil, and into cisterns under the wall of the Fort St. George. They were piped for 2 kilometers from 7 Wells area. And this is perhaps the earliest piped water supplies in Asia, and perhaps the world too. And incidentally, when Hyder Ali could not capture Madras, he tried to poison these wells with dead animals, the carcasses of dead animals, so that the city would come bent on its knees. But luckily, the wells were protected by an Anglo-Indian family and did not happen. Madras population doubled in 1940s. Madras doesn't grow by birth of babies, okay? It grows by migration of people who are looking to the land of gold. And Madras has always attracted migrants like a magnet. And that's why the population doubles in a decade or goes up very fast, offering a challenge to the planners. Tanker supply, we imagine, happened in the 90s and the 2000s, but water tanker supplies happened as early as 1950s and has been sustained from there. This is an emergency water supply scheme in 1954. So we see long queues and metal kodams. We don't have plastic kodams at that time. So this is the first dam that sustained Madras. The year, if you see above, that yellow plaque is 1868. This was less than 9 years after the Sepoy Mutiny, and North India was still under big tension, and the British monarchy had taken over the country. But in 1868, Madras was building its first dam around the Kosasthala Yar in Tamaripakam, and a canal took those water into Red Hills Lake. And today, there are several dams all around Madras built in successive droughts and famines. But today, even water comes from 300 kilometers away in the famous Chola Lake of Viranam or the Krishna River to sustain the city. So this city is basically on survival. It knows all the ways how it can survive. I'm sure 1,000 years down the line, it would have become like Rome or London and still continue to survive. One piece of trivia along with the water problem. The LIC caught fire in 1975 during the emergency. Madras was reeling under a very big drought. There was not a drop of water in the fire engines. So at one point, the fire department said, we can't, they shrugged and said, then threw up their hands and said, we can't save this building, let it burn down. There's little we can do. And there's an engineer in the fire department who came up with the idea, why can't we use the Kuam water for putting out the fire? And that's exactly what they did. The Kuam is just a few hundred meters across the road, and they took the water from Kuam via tankers and put out the fire. So we were willing to lose the landmark building that we once had, the tallest building in India. For 7 years, it was the tallest building in India. And we were willing to let it burn down because we did not have water. Madras will go on to the next topic, which is the wars. And Madras is the only city in India that was attacked both in World War I and World War II. And by very distant enemies, Germany and Japan. The picture is of the SMS Emden. You would all be familiar with the name by now. In 1916, the World War I was across the world, and the First World War, and many millions from Asia were employed in the armies of Europe. And so Madras was a legitimate target for the Germans. But they did not believe that Madras could be attacked so far away from Germany. The planes were not so too established. A majority of there was a blackout in Madras. They were ordered to put down the lights. But unfortunately, it was also Navaratri day. The city was very well lit. And most of the people who had to be at their post defending the city were sitting in the clubs and parties when the German light cruiser SMS Emden came within 2 kilometers of the city and hurled 130 shells on Madras. The city was unsuspecting, and we suddenly had 100 fires going up in all parts of the cities. The longest fire was in the Anglo-Persian liquid fuel tanks in the harbor. But walls across Madras had huge holes like this where the shrapnel had hit. This is the sailing club, and the roof had holes because it was very close to the sea. Shrapnel hit the court. Just look at the wide variety of places where the shrapnel hit. The court, the sailing club, General Hospital, Veperi, Hados Road, Punamali High Road, Royapuram, Casa Major Road, and Georgetown. And there was a lot of smoke and fires going on in these places for a day or two. The city was scared out of its wits. There were rumors that the governor had run away, the British government had run away, and people wanted to move out. There were not too many automobiles or buses or trains, and so people wanted to go out as well. And the government actually had to print that there were no televisions to assure you like today, and the government printed songbooks where it had employed poets and write poems about how strong the British Empire was. On the other hand, the local people braving the private censorship, the government had called all newspapers privately and told them don't publish too much of news about this. But then the private public also published books on this. One book that you see is Germania Gundal Patanatha Janangal Padavikkum Sindhu. The Sindhu was like a type of poetry on which they explained how the public were suffering. This plaque you can see, the number 2 picture, is on the wall of the High Court where a portion of the wall was broken by one of these bombs. Madras was the jewel in the crown for the British. They did not expect this attack. It shamed them. The British wanted to avenge the insult and chase the Emden. They lost a lot of fine ships battling against this terror, but the Emden, which had bullied weaker ships all its life, met its match. Not here, but very close to Australia and the North Keeling Island and the Cocos Archipelago. The Emden had traveled 56,000 kilometers during the war and sent a lot of fine ships down to the seabed. But its attack on Madras was what caused its destruction finally. I am not going chronologically, I am going along with events, similar events. So the next day, the big war event in Madras was the Japanese bomb some 30 years later, 1942-43. Singapore had fallen to the Japanese. Singapore was a major base for the Allied powers. When Singapore fell to the Japanese, the Allied camp shifted to Madras and Avadi to be specific. The people of Madras did not know what was happening in Avadi. In 1946, after the end of the war, a lot of journalists were taken to Avadi and shown how something like 20,000 soldiers, 3 airfields, 2 cinema theaters, 3 swimming pools, a private railway track inside, all these survived in that area between Pattabiram and Avadi. I'm still told that the railway track takes a bend, a detour, so as not to hit this, because it was late during that time. The local people did not know about the camp, but they did not know why, and that is why they did not know why that the Japanese were trying to attack Madras fervently. The British went all over in arming Madras for the theatre of war in the Far East, and seaplanes, the Catalina seaplanes, used to land in Red Hills Lake. There were airfields all over Madras. One of these airfields was even used for your Sholavaram racetrack much later. And with the Tambaram or the Meenambakam, everything was made into Royal Air Force tracks. A lot of British and American troops were in Madras. We get a lot of photographs from the American soldier photographers who came to Madras at the time, which pinpoint to us to their history. The Japanese concentrated on attacking Madras and other towns nearby. Colombo and Kakinada had been attacked, and an ARP is called an Air Raid Patrol. So it was organized, it's a government civilian link up so that there could be a lot of coordination in the defense. So the ARP put up advertisements in the newspaper saying Japan declares war, Madras now in the war area, and said it is hoped our passive defense will receive impetus. It is not too late to train. And finally it says Madras must not burn. So Madras not burning due to the Japanese Axis powers was very important to the British, because this is where they were giving their last stand after most of Far East Asia had fallen to the Japanese. So on the left you see the trench, 22 kilometers of trenches were dug in Madras. So they could have thousands of people there. People are told that when air raid warning wailed, if in a building, stay there. If in the open, take care in the nearest building or go to the nearest street slit trench. Don't move until the raiders pass is sound. And how alarming it could be to the local people if, just like your coronavirus today that people hand out, people are given this chart to recognize if the enemy was overflying or it was a friendly aircraft. It caused a lot of alarm in the city. If people dropped a vessel in the kitchen, half a dozen people would have a heart attack. Every flying bird was suspect. So that was the terror that Madras underwent in the 1942-43 period. The biggest disaster was shooting the zoo. How many of you know that the entire Madras Zoo was shot, not by the enemy, but by friendly fire, the Malabar police? The reason? I'll get to the story. Madras has a long tradition of exhibiting animals. The initial zoo was in the museum compound. That is how we know of the Veer College and Satya College and Veer College. And people, after this, had moved to the People's Park next to the compound of the central station today. And the managers in the corporation were worried, what if a stray bomb hits the zoo and opens up the zoo? Wild animals will be let loose on a unsuspecting population. This problem was not unique to Madras. Every city in the world faced it. With a big zoo and the scare of bombing faced this. Berlin Zoo was bombed by the Royal Air Force, and wild animals had to be shot street to street by their police. And then, luckily, it didn't happen in India, but in other places, even like England, pets had to be put to sleep because there was not enough food for them. So 500,000 pets were killed in England during those last weeks of the war. So in Madras, what happened? When they decided, the mayor, Chakrai Chetty, spoke to a lot of zoos in India, asking that whether they would take a free these animals for free. But most of them face the same problem. They didn't have feed, they didn't have the security from bombing, so why should they take it? Europe agreed to take it, but they said they would take it in a week. But the order to shoot the animals came. 3 lions, 6 lionesses, 4 tigers, 8 leopards, 4 bears and a black panther were shot in a matter of an hour. Elephants were not shot because perhaps they didn't have enough labor. Most people had run away. They didn't have enough labor to dig a grave for it. For accounting purposes, the invaluable population of the zoo was accounted at 4,568 rupees. This is just a small trivia. But that accounting system, how much we had lost, was never really reflected in this account. A big chunk of the Madras population ran away. This is a real watercolor. This is in USA right now. But this painting was done in Madras, and this and another painting was of people escaping a war-torn Madras on bullock carts. The evacuation perhaps was the greatest danger that ever faced Madras. People in large number felt that the city would be bombed to smithereens by the Japanese, and they had to escape as well. It was not safe to live, they thought. So they were tired of blackouts and mock air raids exercises, false alarms. So they thought they had to run away. And at one point, the British government went along with them and said, you shift from exposed positions. And government said in advice to city firms and banks, move out. What the government meant was exposed positions was the beach road, where all the commercial and the government capital was there. The beach seemed to be the first point of invasion. So officers shifted inside. Even the collector shifted to the building called the Cloisters. A lot of people would not know the Cloisters is still the Commerce Department of the Stella Maris College. And the building still exists. The Tahsildar moved, and the City Civil Court moved, Madras GPO moved, and for those who live in Mylapore, the Reserve Bank Treasury section moved to where the Kamadhenu Theatre was. At that time, the officers moving were not encouraging to the common public. They were seeing the government running for shelter. So they thought the villages would be safer. This is a cartoon, but Madras never loses its sense of humor. When you look at the number of memes and the number of jokes that you get about coronavirus, and you still laugh at it. Sometimes I think it is not the way we should handle problems. But even then, and there was a danger of a Japanese bomb, and there's a danger of scarcities. Magazines like the Jagan Mohini ran a cartoon of an overweight girl being pushed into an overcrowded train leaving Madras. It says Madras to Tiruchirappalli. And this is a magazine, Jagan Mohini, was run by a very popular Tamil writer called Vaimu Kodanaigi. I will just give you a small trivia, though not associated with this talk. Vaimu Kodanaigi was illiterate when she wrote her first novel. Then she learned Tamil and went on to write 115 more novels, and also edited this magazine of Jagan Mohini. What would you do when you want to run away from your house? You take your valuables, count your children, and find a way of leaving the city. But you also need to lock your house. In the late 30s, there were only around 50 lock-making units in Dindigul. And locks were not being imported from Japan because Japan was at war. Non-availability of locks delayed the departure of many Madrasis who got nervous every moment. The price of locks went sky high, and there was a new breed of brigands who specialized in stealing locks. They would steal the locks from one place and sell it to somebody else who unsuspectingly bought it and lock it into their house only to lose it in a day or two. I think one of these voices is not muted. There are 2 roads, the Kundratur road from Porur and the Bangalore highway, which the government differentiated for slow and fast moving traffic. They wanted people to go. And a consequence, rent set up in other places. And Kumbakonam actually reports in the Indian Express saying that the rent has gone up there, sequel to the exodus from Madras. This is Kurvila Jacob, who was the principal of the MCC school then. He would send a letter to the parents asking them not to fear Japanese, be courageous, and also pay the next few months of school fees in advance. So that is how careful people were being. We are repeating history, just like it was told in the earlier introduction about Santa Ana saying, those who forget the lessons of history are forced to repeat it. We don't have to forget them. They will get repeated even if we don't forget. So the school fees asking you to be paid in advance. And even library books. The Madras University Library said return the tickets and return the books as if it was primary for a city that is going to be bombed. And what happened finally? Madras was bombed just one day. It was 1943. And the irony was, this is the part of the bomb which is in the museum, the Fort Museum rather. And finally when the bomb fell, ironically nobody knew in the city. There was a cyclone going on, there was a power cut, and there was no alarm, raid warning alarms going on. And it came in the newspaper 3-4 days later because of the censorship. And people realized that Madras had been bombed. The bombs fell harmlessly north of the fort, between Reserve Bank and the fort, and a few sheep were killed, and a shepherd was hurt. So that is what happened when, after 3 years, it became such a big anticlimax that no bombs hurt Madras. But more than the bomb or the fear of the city being suffering, the early part of 1940s was perpetual scarcities. From Madras not being, Madras will not burn, the slogan became Madras will not starve. War disrupts manufacturing and supply lines. Scarcities are felt by the population, hoarding happens. So the ARP, the Air Raid Precautions Group, once again linked to the TUCS, which still exists today, the Triplicane cooperative stores, and they set up rationing. The ration cards that we have today as are the basis of our citizenship they were first given in the 1940s. Once again, weddings. What happened to weddings, which are big events in the 1940s, just like they are now? People were going on the newspapers and advertising, asking friends and guests not to come for the wedding. They said, please post your greetings or send a telegram. I am not in a position to issue invitations or relations because the upper limit was 30. So the closest family could attend the wedding. This advertisement is from P.T. Rajan, who was one of the leading politicians of those days. He himself could not invite more than 30 people. And this could have been the real climax of this scarcity. The city contemplated banning idlis because it contained too much of resources. 2,000 bags of black gram are needed for the city, but only 70 bags are coming in. And vadais, bondas, idlis, and dosais were taken off the menus. A neighboring state of the royal state of Cochin actually banned idlis. And there were lots of rumors that idlis were going to be banned in Madras. But then finally, good times came back again, and this dish that represents Madras did not move off our plates. The other major thing that has really affected our diets even today, wheat was introduced. People did not like wheat. The Madrasis did not like wheat. And wheat was being imported as well as moved from the north. But food tastes of the people were not very easy to change. So the corporation gave free cooking demonstrations on street corners. They even claimed that wheat was more nutritious than rice, which everybody will tell you which is wrong. And also two dishes that you are very familiar with, Rava idli and Godumai dosais, were invented during this period. Godumai dosai, of course, in Madras, and Rava idli in Bangalore. We had a sort of small demonetization-like problem way back then because the copper in the coin, the first I should tell you that the copper, an army is a glutton for metals, and you need metals for everything from wiring to planes to even your bullet, your shells had to be lined with copper so that they will not foul the guns. And the copper prices shot up because mines were also not accessible from South America. So people realized that the intrinsic copper inside a coin was more valuable than the value of the coin. So they started hoarding it. Suddenly there was a scarcity of coins, and people, very rich people only used to handle notes those days. Coin was the main currency, and the government cracked down on people who were hoarding coins. They gave rewards to people who were complaining about this, and they even finally they could not succeed. And finally, the Vatayana came, where this hole in the middle of the coin takes away its weight. It was also a period when railways were actually advertising in the newspapers, asking people not to travel, asking people to retrospect whether the last journey you made was necessary. And finally, they said, if you have nothing to do, don't do it traveling. Stay at home. Exactly what we are getting today. But what made the railways say this was because most of the railways was being used for the war effort. And number two, many of the Indian engines had been sent to Mesopotamia for the war effort. And the railways did not even have enough engines to shunt these carriages in the station. They had enough engines only to run the trains, and they used elephants. They employed elephants to act. Throughout India, they used elephants to shunt the carriages into the required tracks. Shortages came in everything. People were asked